My name is Liane Kuhns, and I'm a member of the Social Concerns Committee. And so again, we welcome you, and our service and sermon relate to the Charity of the Quarter. Our Charity of the Quarter is Northumberland County Youth Leadership Group of Pennsylvania. I think everybody knows that at this point. And welcome to the members of the group with us today. There's a poster in the back that tells more about the group, and they brought some pamphlets for us today, which I believe you can take with you and share, so I encourage you to do that. You can read on that poster about the many impressive number of good works that they've done since they just formed in the summer, and you can also read about the ones that they're planning to do soon. You heard their powerful statement. These teens did not feel part of an understanding community or perhaps family. Now they've created a caring mini-community where they are accepted. They have determined to inject themselves positively and actively by engaging in good works for the broader community. That's admirable and brave. Their motto is just 3 very compelling words: overcome, impact, inspire. To me, overcome relates to the taming of the negative influences of the past. Impact speaks to the present. What can be done today? And inspire is about tomorrow. The idea that what I do today can be a catalyst for someone else's tomorrow. But the group said it in 3 words. I should be so brief. When I set out to write this sermon on youth making a difference, which, by the way, the title is actually different. It's Youth Making a Difference for Youth. When I set out to write this sermon on youth making a difference, I thought about stories of youth who are doing amazing things. You may remember Malala from the news, the Pakistani girl who was shot by the Taliban because she wanted girls not to lose their right to an education. Malala has fascinated and inspired me and millions of people, and she changed the world. She was named one of Time magazine's most influential people. Malala Yousafzai, I had to look that up with Anne's help, Yousafzai, attended a school in Pakistan founded by her father, an anti-Taliban activist. After the Taliban began attacking girls' schools and trying to prevent girls from even reading, Malala, at age 11, gave a speech entitled, "How dare the Taliban take away my basic right to education?" She began a blog on the subject. Her activism and following grew, resulting in her being awarded Pakistan's National Youth Peace Prize in 2011. Then the Taliban issued a death threat against her. On October 9th, 2012, on her way home from school, a man boarded the bus that Malala and her classmates were in and shot her and 2 other girls, striking Malala on the side of her head. Although in critical condition, she survived the attack and the many surgeries that followed in England. Miraculously, she had no major brain damage and was able to resume attending school. The shooting resulted in a massive outpouring of support for Malala. She gave a speech at the UN, the United Nations, on her 16th birthday. You thought this was a little nerve-wracking? And she wrote an autobiography called I Am Malala, the girl who stood up for education and was shot by the Taliban. Still a Taliban target, she remains a staunch advocate for the power of education. The European Parliament awarded Malala the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought in 2014. That same year, at the age of 17, she became the youngest person to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. That's a good resume. In response to her courage and determination, the expression, I am Malala, resonated from girls and adults and cultures well beyond her own. That's a young Malala. I interpret I am Malala to mean, we stand with you. We will not be frightened into ending the fight for what is right. Malala has a very brave father who, for the greater good, challenged opposing forces and instilled her with values and a sense of purpose. Less is said about her mother, though I'm sure she played a role. And as a result of Malala's work, her mother is now learning to read. But I wonder whether Malala would have become the force that she is had she not had the positive influence and support of her family. And then there's the story of the amazing 7-year-old Sailor Gutzler from Illinois. Flying their private plane back from a vacation in Florida, Sailor's father could not avoid a crash that killed him, Sailor's mother, sister, and cousin. Sailor survived. She walked out of the woods with a broken wrist in frigid darkness, having lit a stick from the flames of the wreckage, to find refuge at an unfamiliar home almost a mile away. Such irony that the flames contributing to the loss of her family were the same flames that guided her to safety. Although desperate, she saved herself and amazed the country with her resolve. And reportedly, she is now being nurtured by her extended family and her community, and I'm sure that will be ongoing. So these sorts of stories are what I thought of first when planning my sermon. They represent, overcome, impact, inspire, for sure. And then I thought, nah. Because seriously, in fact, most of us are not Malala, and not even Sailor. These are stories about spectacular young people and events, and as inspiring as they are, they may be harder to identify with. We wonder, or more likely doubt, if we could do even a small measure of what they have done. But I did not abandon sharing these stories because they are still a testament that in each one of us, there is likely to be much more potential and capacity than anyone, ourselves included, would have wagered. But how can people, specifically youth, make a difference that may be less newsworthy, but perhaps more readily doable? Doable by youth who may not have a parent or a presence in their lives who instills hope, determination, and support to be their best selves. Youth who have not had a community that welcomes them, warts and all, to share the gifts that they could offer. Youth who may not be geniuses or epic heroes, at least not yet. It may be that most teens have not begun thinking about wanting to make a difference in their communities or in their world. Or maybe they think about it but are stymied by not knowing how to do it. So their attention goes back to the more clear and immediate needs and interests in their lives. And the same could likely be said about most adults. And yet, sometimes finding a way to make a difference, even if in a seemingly small way, can be the very thing that saves a life, that creates a life, for a youth that has felt unseen, unheard, unwanted, unhappy, unaccepted, and unengaged. What do our communities do to create and nurture such opportunities for youth? This is an important question for the well-being of these teens, but also for the well-being of the community. Because ultimately, if we do not support them being stakeholders in our community, we may be fostering them to be takeholders of our community. So I wanted to share some examples of youth making a doable difference. Lois, from our Social Concerns Committee, has told us about 4 local teens who spent several months, and I'm quoting Lois now, working on a half-hour-long PowerPoint. The teens outlined 4 potential community endeavors that could bring economic revitalization to Milton: a fire prevention and education center, a smart eco-friendly home that would serve as a tourist site, vertical hydroponic gardening along the river, and a large solar parking lot. I mean, really, how creative is that? Those are not, your typical ideas. 2 of these projects could lead to new manufacturing for the area. The presentation was attended by around 20 community leaders and was well received. The group is now working on a second presentation in which they will create small demonstrations of each project. That is youth engagement. That is a community inviting youth to have a voice and an impact. That is youth investing in their communities and their future. And really, when there is investment in their future, that necessitates investment in their present. But if youth have little hope for their future, then investment in the present seems futile. Liane Kuhns, you may know, is a Mifflinburg teen and no relation to me. Her older sister, Kelsey, died in 2005 from leukemia at age 12. Kylie was 8. She and her sister had attended Camp Dose together, a camp for kids with cancer. A couple years later, she started Kelsey's Dream to raise money for the camp, which needed funding. She and her grandparents decided to make and sell apple butter to raise funds, a doable project. Over the years, the goal became bigger, and the fundraising efforts grew to include the annual Kelsey's Fall Festival, the aluminum pull tab recycling drive, and many other varied fundraisers. Because now Kylie's goal was to provide a chemo duck for every child in Pennsylvania diagnosed with cancer. A chemo duck is a plush toy outfitted like a child's body during chemotherapy. Medical staff can show the cancer patient a chemotherapy procedure on the duck to help teach the child and ease their anxiety about the treatment they're about to have. Once her Pennsylvania goal was achieved, Kelsey broadened her goal to include kids with cancer in the entire East Coast. Last I heard, only the state of Florida was not yet covered with chemo ducks. Kylie, now a senior, has won many awards for her philanthropy. Carly and Sean are two 17-year-olds in Carmel, California, who joined Mentor Up, an intergenerational mentoring program that coordinates community services. Carly and Sean won 2 grants from AARP, American Association of Retired Persons, to start Wired for Connections, which is an effort that pairs teens with aging adults to help them understand technology and new devices. Now, see, I said aging adults, but parents of teens also need that help so their kids don't just look at them patronizingly and chuckle and say, "Oh, Mom." That's mine right there. That's mine. Say hi, Ben.
He's never done that.
He says, "Let me just do it myself." What's especially great about this intergenerational pairing is that the elderly may also be looking for ways to become or remain connected in their communities. Carly and Sean's advice is to start with what inspires you and find people and organizations with similar goals in your community as they did. They also created a connection between their school and Mentor Up. They wanted to inspire other youth to get involved, and so they set up club meetings to share how their mentoring experiences fulfilled them. And that led their classmates to become increasingly engaged and excited about the program, and the program grew. These examples are also inspiring, but I have to wonder, did these youth come from strong families who were able to nurture them, providing for their concrete, emotional, and educational needs? And my biased assumption is that they did, which is not to say that I discount the pain of terrible loss like Kylie experienced, or that I presume they did not have particular hardships of one kind or another. Sean, for example, has dyslexia. However, I think it is a different thing when a youth has trauma or hardships on multiple fronts and very limited and inconsistent support. That familiar expression, "it takes a village" for these youth, it is that much more essential that the village comes through and provides for youth like this. Excuse me. Our communities are losing resources. The Big Brother, Big Sister program in our area was closed. The need was way bigger than the resource could satisfy. Many years ago, a community recreational facility in Penns Creek closed, and the after-school program at Zion Lutheran Church struggles to stay open, and that's a good program. So not only must the village nurture youth as individuals, but also nurture the resources that exist to support them. Resources like Northumberland County Youth Leadership, 4-H, the Heater Center, and the Jungle Teen Center, and the UU OWL and Coming of Age mentoring programs. And by the way, January was the National Mentoring Month. Resources need resources, financial, human, and educational. We need the village with a big capital V to be on board. In doing some research for the sermon, I learned about national resources that I had not heard of. And one of these supports, it's a mouthful, the Interagency Working Group on Youth Programs. It has representatives from 18 departments and agencies that include things like the National Science Foundation, the EPA, Department of Education, Department of Homeland Security. It's kind of a strange mix of agencies. Their goals are to promote enhanced collaboration at the federal, state, and local levels, to disseminate information about critical resources, to develop an overarching strategic plan for federal youth policy, and to produce a federal website to promote effective community-based efforts that aim to reduce risk factors and to provide high-quality services to at-risk youth. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I think it's important that in doing this, they knew it was important to get feedback from youth. So they created listening sessions with youth from a variety of backgrounds and experiences to understand what challenges they face, potential solutions that the youth could think of for these challenges, and ideas about how to reach out to more youth. So, it was a long list of feedback, which I can give you a resource to learn more about. But notably, transportation to these resources was a big issue, and that's certainly an issue here. And also, they said, we don't want our programs to be the first line that gets cut when budgets are reassessed. I discovered other national organizations such as Youth Move that seems to have a similar objective, including providing a website to find resources at local levels. So I'll give you that resource so you can get your name on there. And then there's local resources that are included on that website, like Mile High United Way of Denver, Colorado, which impressed me because its aims are to support early child development and early literacy, education and youth development, and family income and economic stability, which they deem to be the fundamental building blocks for a good quality of life, and they're certainly can be interrelated. So to provide that support, Mile High partners with hundreds of local nonprofits, government agencies, policymakers, and businesses to collectively solve community-wide problems. My field is working with families that are in distress. Our model that we use insists that we look at individuals and their behaviors within the context of their history, their familial relationships, culture, and the broader context of their community relationships. Understanding negative interpersonal relational patterns is very central to our approach to promoting change. I've often thought of negative relational patterns as like the patchwork quilts, no slight intended to Jean Weston's beautiful quilts here that we heard about last week. But many patchworks repeat their patterns and repeat and repeat and predictably repeat again. For example, I say this to you, you do that, little Bobby has a huge tantrum, someone yells, sides are taken, chaos and conflict ensue. Repeating negative patterns stifle nurturance, growth, and hope for change. When we encounter a person or a system that seems to function like a patchwork negative pattern, we can instead envision those individuals, families, and communities like the subjects of artist M.C. Escher's transformation prints of the 1930s. You can see in the insert in your bulletin next to the words to Lean on Me is one of Escher's transformation prints. Escher studied optical illusions. You may recall the picture that's published there, that in one corner it looks like birds flying, and in the opposite corner the birds have slowly been transformed into fish. It's kind of awesome. The transformation collection demonstrated that small, subtle changes in a familiar pattern can produce an end result that looks remarkably different than the starting point. It is meaningful to me that the change from beginning to end does not happen by throwing out the old and starting anew, because we can't throw out trauma like it never left a mark. Instead, the transformation is a progression involving the same initial elements that go through an evolution. And it begins with a resolve to try something new, and it develops slowly with patience and support, and in the end, if there is an end, it has become something new. And we might suppose it's still becoming. You may also remember from Intro to Psychology, W.E. Hill's drawing that at one glance looks like the face of a creepy old woman. Anne said I couldn't say a witchy old woman because she thought that was stereotypical. So. Or else it looks like the profile of a beautiful lady. That picture is also in your handout. It's really a very disorienting picture when you go or try to go back and forth between the two. But what we see depends a lot on which detail our eyes and brain focused on first. How powerfully that affects the whole that we perceive. This is a cautionary tale. Be careful if you look at someone or some resource and first see the wart. It signals a quote from the wonderful movie The Imitation Game. Sometimes it is the people who no one imagines anything of that do the things that no one can imagine. Struggling youth are in need of a village that sees them as having potential, that nurtures them to achieve that potential, that gives them an opportunity to have a voice and a means to be invested in their own transformation and in the growth of their community. And the first step toward that end is for our communities to begin a transformation. You could have been done now, but my husband, who was my guinea pig audience yesterday, reminded me that a good sermon prompts congregants to not only reflect, but contemplate specific action. So, in concrete terms, what could each of us do to transform a community, to increase youth being positively engaged in their communities? And I want to start by going back to do what inspires you. And if a big project would turn you away from any project, then pick something small. But here are some ideas. Find an opportunity to be a mentor. It's on my list of things to do here. Ask your grandkids or your kids or your grandkids what volunteer opportunities they might be interested in doing with you, and suggest inviting their peers to join you. Share a great idea for integrating people of different ages or ethnicities or other groups that don't generally mix. And this reminded me of a school in Brazil. You might have seen it, went across Facebook. There's a school in Brazil who thought to pair their students learning English with older Americans that lived in a Chicago retirement community. And so when they Skype together, not only do the retirees show the teens how to perfect their true conversational English, really what people actually mean and how they actually speak, but these mutually meaningful relationships developed, and they were a support for each other. It was really a moving video. Another idea is to suggest that local high schools sponsor a forum event for youth to identify their challenges and suggest solutions and address obstacles, and then to become a part of an effort to help bring at least one of those ideas to fruition. You could tutor at an existing after-school program. You could seek out others who want to start a rec center or a teen center in your community and start a campaign, perhaps by borrowing strategies from communities that built the playgrounds like Kids Grove and Kidsburg. They really flourished and people got involved. They gave their time, they gave their money, and they continued to support the ongoing maintenance of those places. Is there a way to do that for after-school kind of programs? And I want to tell you, the Weiss that closed in Selinsgrove, there was buzz going around that it was going to be some sort of a rec center or teen center or something. And I just heard buzz, and I thought the buzz was going to grow. And next thing I know, it's not going to be a rec center. It's going to be a Kohl's hardware store. And I value local business flourishing, but I was disappointed. And, maybe that process could have been slowed down if I and other people had gotten involved. And my last pitch is my own personal bias, and that is find out what grade your local high school allows teens to enter VOTEC. Consider campaigning to allow earlier entry into VOTEC for kids at risk of failing or dropping out, because if they can't wait until VOTEC is an option, they're not getting any education when they drop out, and I've seen that. These are some ways that youth making a difference can start by us making a difference for youth.